All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're about at center of mass, so if you're trickling in, please feel free to grab more food. At this point, we're going to get ready to start this discussion, but I do have a couple introductory notes to kick this off. On behalf of NSLA and GW's National Security, Cybersecurity, and Foreign Relations Law program, welcome to this fascinating discussion. I think it's sufficient to say we're all very excited that Mr. O'Neill is here to join us. Mr. O'Neill, thank you for being here today. Before we begin the formal portion of the discussion, I want to take an opportunity to introduce Professor Richard and thank him for being here also. Professor Richard served as a national security lawyer at the CIA for over 20 years. He served as the former DCIA's chief of staff. He currently works as the agency's director for cyber and digital policy, and he's served as an adjunct law professor teaching intelligence law for over 15 years. So thank you for being here today, Professor Richard, and I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kendall, and thank you, everybody, for being here. Hopefully folks in the back can hear us okay. Great. It is my pleasure to welcome back former alum Eric O'Neill for this discussion today. This is someone who really doesn't need any introduction, but just to sort of give you context of all the things that he has done. He is a local individual, went to Gonzaga High School, graduated from Auburn University with degrees in poli-sci and psychology. Ended up joining the FBI, which I'll sort of jump over that because we're going to talk a lot about that in a little bit. But needless to say, he was instrumental in the arrest of Robert Hanssen, who was probably one of the most significant spies in our country's history. While he was at the FBI at night, he attended law school here at GW, ended up graduating in 2003. Eventually left the bureau and started, instead of going from sort of assignment to assignment, he ended up actually just adding things that he was working on, which I think is most impressive. First, took a job working at a global humanitarian NGO in a legal capacity, then added, so not moved, into sort of critical infrastructure, supply chain assurance, cybersecurity issues. And I have to say, he was really sort of ahead of a lot of these issues, because this is sort of all we talk about in DC today, and this was something he started maybe 10 years ago. He is now part of the VMware Carbon Black. He's a national security strategist, so he brings to the table not only sort of legal experience that we can talk about, but also policy and sort of technical experience and how he sort of combined those two. So you please give me a warm welcome for Eric O'Neill.
Well, thank you everybody for having me here. Look, the last time I was here was, I think, a day before everything shut down for COVID. It was after all of the students back then were told don't come back to school, and I was here. I was like, is anyone going to show up? And people did, which was wonderful. So now it's good to be back here to GW in better times. The one thing that I did do between the FBI and going in-house at Global Communities and all the other things I do was I did go into big law for 5 years. I was in government contracts and national affairs, and paid off my law school debt, and then decided to go and start my own business and do those sort of things. So there's about 5 years in there where I actually learned to be a lawyer in that sense, and now I'm chief executive and vice president for a global company that helps people in 30 different countries. That's how I continue to practice law, and that lets me do all the other fun stuff I do as well.
So how we were going to sort of proceed is I was going to ask a sort of series of questions, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So I guess I want to start, Eric, just how did you find yourself at the Bureau? Was that something you always sort of wanted to do as you were growing up, or was it serendipity? How did you find yourself there?
Well, I was raised, and I think maybe the better way to say it is programmed to go to the Naval Academy. And my father was in the Navy, so was my grandfather, a bunch of uncles, a great-grandfather, My two youngest brothers ended up going. My father learned from his mistakes with me, and I didn't. I went to Auburn to go. My objective was to go into aerospace engineering, and after a year in aerospace, I decided for some reason I was going to go into psychology and political science. People ask, "What's the one thing you would have told yourself to do if you go back in time?" And don't leave aerospace, gut it out. Because when I got here, I actually wanted to be an intellectual property attorney. And then I realized because I didn't finish the engineering degree, that was going to be super difficult. But I ended up in government contracts and it was wonderful. I think that I was raised and I have a belief that service is important. I still do that by working for the humanitarian company. That's how I continue to give back. I think that that's very important. We're blessed and we get all these opportunities and we need to use them in a way that helps others. And I was looking for a way to do that. I was also out of Auburn University with a psychology and political science degree trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Always loved the idea of law. My father not only was a naval officer, but then went to law school. And to talk about somebody you got to follow, he graduated from the Naval Academy second in his class, and then Yale top in his class. It's like, how do I better that? Because we're all supposed to do better than our parents, right? And I'm still trying. But anyway, I decided I'm going to find a way to serve, but also, I was 22 years old, do something really cool. And so I applied to the FBI, the DEA, the NSA, the CIA. You actually, back then, you sent a business, you sent like a card in and they sent you back like this big pile of paper and you had to fill it all out. And it took weeks. Everybody, I heard back very quickly from the Secret Service, the FBI, and the DEA, and I started the process for all three. And I decided whoever gives me a training slot first, and it was the FBI by one day over the DEA. So my life in that moment would have gone, extremely different one way or the other. In the FBI, I was a spy hunter. I was actually commissioned in counterterrorism. So I learned both sciences. In the DEA, I would have immediately been doing a lot of drug interdiction, especially back then. Probably been shooting a lot of people. Whereas with the FBI, it was a lot more cerebral, so I was good with either one, and it was the FBI by one day, and that's the long story of how I fell into the FBI.
So when you got there, you said you started sort of doing terrorism cases, but in your book you describe a lot of sort of the surveillance work. So how did that evolve? Was it sort of part and parcel with sort of the terrorism work, or was it sort of an evolution in your career path?
Right, so despite what everybody on TV, everybody that I get interviewed by, the biggest mistake was I get called a special agent. And for a long time I would correct and I don't even bother. But there's a distinction between a special agent and a ghost. Both are commissioned law enforcement officers. Ghosts are particularly trained, or the SSG, Special Surveillance Group, are professionals who are particularly trained to investigate and follow people clandestinely without ever being seen. I could follow you up. I could follow you from. I could still do it, right? You don't lose the skills from sun up till sundown. I could listen to you sleep at night. You wouldn't know I was there. If you snored, I knew. I could, and during that time, I could count every single person that you met, have photographs of all of the meets, or now it's more video. I know how many times you checked your watch, tied your shoes, every person you met, whether you like coffee or tea, everything about you. That was what I was trained to do. And the idea was that we would track known or suspected targets who were either foreign intelligence or terrorist targets operating in the United States. There was a group created to make sure that we had a handle on them, and we would follow them, we would investigate them until that moment when they were going to do their dastardly deed, or in spies, we let them do it, and then we would call in SWAT teams or others who would make the arrest. Then we'd melt back into the shadows, and we'd never be seen, which is where we got the moniker ghosts. So it was very cool to describe. But the reality is that I spent a lot of days, my wife loves reminding me of this, I spent a lot of days just sitting there looking at a taillight, hoping someone got in the car and it lit up and they drove away and I got to do something. Which also meant I had a lot of time to study law while I was sitting in cars waiting for people to move, because I was in law school at the same time. So my job, my commission was through the Clinton counterterrorism bill that was pushed through, which opened up the doors of the FBI to hire a lot of people in this new, very important counterterrorism goals of the early 90s and then through the 90s until, of course, the catalyst, which was September 11. And I would bounce between counterterrorism targets and foreign intelligence targets. And it just depended on the target of opportunity. The little known secret is there are way too many targets, especially here in DC, which is the spy capital of the world. Maybe not as many now because everybody's working from home. Sometimes I wonder, like, if everyone's working from home, like, what are the spies doing? Like, you know, if they're not servicing jet drops or sending signals, like, there's no one out for cover. Like, DC's dead. I spent, by the way, a lot of time around this campus and American and campuses like this that the Russians love to come through because you guys are all covered.
So in terms of sort of that experience, how was it going to law school at night and trying to balance that? I mean, sometimes your targets, you have to follow them until you follow them. So how did that impact sort of your law school career?
Yeah, so how many in the room here are night students? Can raise your hands. There, one brave soul. Oh, a couple more. All right. Yes, I feel for you because you all understand what I'm about to say. I tell friends, beg, borrow, steal, be a day student, you'll have a lot of fun. Because, like, especially Thursdays when there was kegs on the quad, we'd come back and you know, the day students would be done with their day chilling and they're having a keg on the quad, which like our student fees paid for, right? And we'd have like 5 minutes between work and getting up to class to chug a beer as fast as we could. I'll tell you this anecdote. One day I said, this is ridiculous and patently unfair, which is the kind of stuff that they drill into your head when you're a lawyer, right? Patently unfair, I still use it. And so I just took my beer up to class. And it was, maybe he's still teaching your Jonathan Turley's class. And I just was like, I'm not even gonna hide this. And I sat right in the front. And he started into his thing, you know, it's like performance theater with Turley. And he stopped abruptly in the middle of what he was saying. And he looked down at me and he said, Mr. O'Neill, is that a beer I see on your desk? I said, why yes it is. And he said, why are you drinking a beer in my class? I said, because there's this thing called kegs on the quad. The night students never have an opportunity to drink it. And I felt that it was patently unfair that I couldn't have one even though some of my student funds goes to pay for this thing. You know, I have a little wristband and everything. And he thought about it and he said, it was really funny. If you ever choose to imbibe in my class again, make sure you bring one for me. And then, of course, like the next day, like everybody brought one up there, and he's like, whoa, we can't do this. So that was what it was like to be a night student. It was hard. Working for the FBI and then trying to make it here to class was very difficult, particularly before I started working the Robert Hanssen investigation, which was actually a little easier because it was right around the corner. At FBI headquarters. But before then, if my target was moving, I had to move with my target. I couldn't say, hey, peace out, everybody. I got to make it to GW for my law school class. You guys go and run without a team member. That didn't work. I can tell you, it made it really hard to date, too. Very lucky I met my wife. There was, I can remember one morning, I woke up and I was in Miami because all night, my target had decided to get in his car, unannounced, like we had no intel it was going to happen, and just drove south. And we just drove after him. And we just kept going. We had no clue where he was going, and there was this whole crisis. This was a very, very, very important foreign intelligence target. And we ended up in Miami. And then, of course, they had to find a team to come and relieve us. So we ended up finding the cheapest hotel, because it's never a nice one. We weren't staying where he was. And waking up the next morning and tracking them until they could bring another team on. And I had to call somebody. I had a date that night. I had to call and say, here's the reason. Well, I can't really tell you why I didn't make it, which was unfortunate. But I'm in Miami. And she was like, never call me again. Part of the course.
So just to that real quick, before we sort of explore the Hanssen experience for you. So what did you tell your family like you were doing? Was it sort of a generic FBI analyst? Was it were you able to go into some specifics about what you were doing?
Well, I would tell people that I was a geopolitical analyst for the Department of Justice, which is so boring that nobody cared, right? And then I realized that's so boring, nobody cares. And I'm trying to meet people. And then I realized, you know what, I'm trained to lie. So that's what I'm going to do. So then I started going out and I'd meet someone and I'd say, I'm a doctor. My favorite was this, I'm an archaeologist, right? And because no one really, I mean, it's funny, no one really knows what archaeologists do unless you like care. Most people think it's like Indiana Jones type stuff, and it isn't at all. But I researched it and I found really fun things to say, and people thought I was an archaeologist, and that meant that I could have conversations with people. Because you couldn't say what you did. My family didn't know what I did. At some point, people figure out you work for the FBI. That's normally after they're driving with you and there's a traffic stop, and you kind of like pull your ID out of your credentials and show the shield. And the cop's like, oh, you're in law enforcement. I'm like, yes, sir, I am. I'm like, okay, you can go ahead. And they're like, who do you work for? And it's like, I can't really talk about it, but it's the FBI. But that's all we're saying. My wife knew when I got married. But I never told her what I did for the FBI, and it was simply that we didn't talk about work. And my father, he still likes to tell the story that when you're working undercover, the more you mime or make things up, the easier it is for a target who's trained to understand what you're doing. So, for example, I would use payphones all the time. We're going back to the 90s. I would use payphones all the time for cover. Like my target's walking, it's this open area. I'd go to the phone and I'd pick it up. If you pick up the receiver, or you're just trying to talk on your cell phone pretending, right? You're pretending, you look really fake. Like watch yourself in the mirror sometime and pretend you're talking to someone. You look ridiculous. So I would throw a quarter in and call my father. Like whatever time it was, you know, normally I knew we're at the law firm working at some point and he'd normally pick up. And I would just talk to him and he'd be like, so what's going on? And I was like, hey, and this and that. And we'd have this conversation and then it would always be, I'd watching the target and then we'd always say, I gotta go back, Dad, bye, click. And then later, like I told him, this is what I'm doing. And he thought it was the funniest thing in the world.
I have to say, this is going to be a challenge for your 3 kids as they become teenagers in terms of trying to sneak out and stuff.
But you know, it's funny because the more children are brilliant at defeating security. They have time and they have just time to work the system and figure out how to defeat security. And I swear, my kids, maybe it's because I'm so good at figuring out how to stop them. They've had to be so good at figuring out how to stop me. And they're great. But mostly because they can shoulder surf my wife. They learned how to do that very early. When my youngest, she's now 10, when she was 5, she shoulder surfed my wife, figured out the iPhone passcode. And then what she did was she would send a screen time request to watch Netflix. When my wife was away from her phone, get to the phone, open the phone with the passcode, accept the screen time request, and then lock the phone, and then clear it. Clear the request before my wife knew. And then we only caught her because she was sitting there watching a show on Netflix she should never, because she also elevated her privileges on Netflix. She went into the phone and found the Netflix password and gave herself access to, she was good, she gave herself access to like PG-13, but she gave the older kids access to R-rated stuff for Christmas. So this is what we're up against with children.
So let's sort of start down that sort of the Hanssen route. So in this job as sort of ghost, did you know much about your targets? Did they intentionally give you a lot of background, or by design would they actually keep that from you to try not to shade sort of your perspective?
Right. So, you know, the difference between analysis and special operations is something I talk about a lot, particularly to special operators, you know, because we all understand that when you're doing field operations, I mean, you're a very well-trained hunter, but if you don't have intel, you can't hunt. And the analysts are really the bread and butter of all counterintelligence. That's where all the magic happens. Our analysts would feed us the intel we needed in order to successfully track a target. So a ghost can't, you know, we can track targets. I mean, you can put me on a target and I will follow them all day and I will do my best. But the more I know about the target, the better I can be ahead of the target. And the best surveillance means that you have to let the target go. If you are on them for long enough, they're going to spot you. Even with all the disguises I used and all the tricks that I use, ways and means that I can't get into all of them, there's a diminishing return and a chance that you're going to be spotted. So at some point, you got to just let them go. I can't take that turn with them. I'm going to let them go. But I know all these things about him, so I'm pretty sure I can catch him up later. He likes this kind of coffee shop. He always goes to this sort of restaurant. We think there's some intel he might have a meet at this spot later in the day. We're going to find him there. And so it became very important. So as a special operator, the idea is that you need as much information as you can get in order to proceed in your job and to do it really well. And so we relied a lot on the analysis we get, not only from the FBI analysts, but CIA and NSA, who would be gathering all these things from overseas and bringing them to us so we can conduct these investigations.
That's great. So tell us sort of how you first heard of Robert Hanssen. Like, how did that sort of get introduced to you?
Well, I think it's literally one of the strangest stories in FBI lore, because there's a little bit of FBI joking around in it. It was a Sunday morning. I'm in my horrible little apartment in Eastern Market, which is all my wife and I could afford, and maybe 7 in the morning. Now I don't remember the last time I slept in past 7 because I've got all these kids. But back then I did a lot when it was Sunday, especially after all that work and then law school every single night and the stressors of being in the FBI and trying to go to school at the same time. And I get a call from my boss, Gene McClelland, who's the supervisory special agent in charge of all of the whole squad of ghosts that protects everything from Baltimore all the way down to Richmond, and mostly Washington, D.C. And that wasn't unusual because, as we said, you move when your target moves, you sleep when they sleep, you eat when they eat, you sort of learn their schedules. So for him to call me and wake me up, I mean, I never had that sort of normal life. And he said, I need to talk to you. I said, okay, I'll get dressed and I'll come downtown and we can chat. Washington field office is where we worked out. And he said, yeah, get dressed, but you don't have to come downtown. I'm parked right outside. That never happens. I mean, this is government. So anyone out there who works in government, you know that you always go to your boss. They never, ever come to you. And it was the strangest thing. I literally thought I was about to get arrested. I thought, okay, yes, you remove him from the wife, get him out into the open, where you can control the situation. It was like all this stuff I was trained for. Now it's happening to me, and I kissed Juliana, I thought maybe the last time, put on oh no, I'm sure it's nothing. I'll never see you again, and walked out the door. Because working undercover meant you were undercover, and working the targets I was working meant you didn't want anyone to know your name. I didn't even have a name in the FBI. I had a code name. But we were working Russian targets, and they're really good at figuring out these things. And of course, disinformation is something that they're even better at. And so they would, from time to time, feed information just to jam up someone working undercover. And then, suddenly you're being investigated and you don't know it. That's what I did. I investigated all sorts of people. So I walk outside thinking I'm in trouble, and I just see Gene sitting in his car grinning at me because he knew how stressed I'd be. That's a little bit of that FBI humor. And I get in the car with him, and he says, have you ever heard of someone named Robert Hanssen? I hadn't worked Hanssen. And I told him as much, and he said, good, because we want you to go undercover and help us catch him, which pissed me off. So I said, you came and parked out in front of my house on a Sunday morning, dragged me out, scared the hell out of me. My wife's in there probably thinking, why is your boss here? And she doesn't even know what I do. So she's never even met you. And to tell me to do what I do all the time, this couldn't wait until tomorrow. And he said, you don't understand. We don't want you to ghost him. We want you to go undercover in this brand new division we've created for him at FBI headquarters. We suspect him of espionage. And my next meeting is with the director of the FBI, and I need to tell him whether you're in or out. So what do you do? And I was in law school and trying to work, and I knew this would be insanely disruptive to my life. I had also, at the day he showed up, I think was almost the 3-month anniversary of being married. We still hadn't had a honeymoon. So I'm thinking, is this a good idea for me? And I was also thinking, like, this, I've never heard of a case like this run, or using an asset like me in this role. And he pushed me. And you know, there are moments in your life where you take a leap of faith, you take a little risk, and you can really achieve something remarkable. I could have never known what I was in for when I said yes, but I did. And you know, the rest is, well, it's literally history.
So did they give you time to sort of study up on him, or was it just that one conversation and the next day was your first meeting with him?
I was told very little other than he's very senior FBI agent. He was a supervisory FBI agent. He had gone to the State Department to ride out his career as a liaison. We received some intel from overseas that he was suspected for espionage. We're creating a trick to bring him back to FBI headquarters. They gave him a promotion. They built a new division in the FBI called the Information Assurance. It was actually the Information Assurance Task Force in the beginning. And the idea being that Hanssen, I didn't know, but had penetrated FBI computer systems for decades to steal information. So to bring him back from the State Department months before he was about to retire from the FBI with his full 25-year pension, they promoted him to executive service, gave him his dream job, building cybersecurity for the FBI. So think about that. They took the FBI's biggest trusted insider hacker, and they put him in charge of cybersecurity for the FBI. And then they looked around the FBI for someone who knew how to catch a spy and turn on a computer and not make Hanssen think I'm being worked. This is an undercover asset. And so they grabbed me, because he would have never thought that someone who was, I think I was 26 at the time, would have been thrown in there to catch him. There's no way his narcissistic hubris would have allowed it. And they basically just put us in a vault and shut the door and hoped I came out okay.
So what was that first meeting like? Like, what was your first impression and his reaction?
Well, I was told very little other than, this is a new assignment for you. And I was given a little prep work by a section chief who was on the same floor, who was one of the 3 other people at the entire FBI headquarters who knew that this was an investigation. And he's Richard Garcia, decorated undercover agent. He had worked in Colombia for years and years, and everybody knew. And he was now the section chief for operations in FBI headquarters. So you can't do any operations in FBI headquarters without him knowing. And I remember talking to him, and he said, "Look, you've just got to not screw up." That's number one. You will blow a multi-million-dollar operation with billions of dollars on the line, and a career's on the line if you're the one who makes Hanssen realize that this is an investigation, and he runs. So don't screw up. And then I said, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, he said, first of all, you can't let him know that you're investigating him, and 2, you got to talk to him. You have to gain his trust. So I really had 3 goals. Don't screw up, gain his trust, and then finally find the information to catch him. So the first conversation, I'm sitting there across the desk from him after this very awkward attempt to have this initial conversation, because I'm thinking in my mind, I got to get him to talk, or how am I supposed to learn anything? And he stops me and he says, have you ever heard of Hanssen's Law? The little recorder goes in my brain. I'm thinking, this sounds good. Maybe, because I had to write all this up every night and then hand it off to the special agent who was in charge of helping me not screw up. And then that would go to the analysts and they would dissect every word. And I said, no, I hadn't heard of Hanssen's Law. I don't remember learning that at the FBI Academy at Quantico. He said, oh, they should teach it there, and they don't. And I said, well, what is it? He said, Hanssen's Law is this: the spy is in the worst possible place. And this is where I learned to keep a poker face, to not show an expression on my face. It became very important for this case. What I wanted to do is have my jaw drop all the way to the floor. Because here I am supposed to catch this guy? And he's telling me the first conversation that the spy is in the worst possible place. And then I'm thinking, we're in the information assurance task force, which, by the way, he turned it into the information assurance section and promoted himself. I think he's the only FBI agent who ever did that. But we were like, let him, whatever, we'll catch him eventually. So it became the information assurance section, which was the center of a web of data in the FBI that not only had access to the FBI data, but data from other agencies that was interconnected. And I'm thinking, yes, this is the spy in the worst possible place. But I looked at him and I kept the conversation going. I didn't let it lag too long. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, an incredibly elegant law, Hanssen's law, and it became the foundation for a lot of my thought leadership in cybersecurity. He said, Hanssen law is this: the spy is in the worst possible place. He is that person who has access to the information that will do the most damage, and the knowledge and the wherewithal to get it into the hands of those who will pay him the most for it. And that is what we're here at the FBI to stop. And it's elegant, it seems simple, but it's brilliant because for any organization that is dealing with a trusted insider, the spy is in the worst possible place. Access, knowledge, and the ability to get it to someone who will pay. And that's what we're all trying to do when you stop a trusted insider. And that is the basis for all of cybersecurity.
So as this is sort of proceeding day by day, were you constantly sort of having to balance the desire to push harder, to get more information more quickly, and wanting to, not sort of scare them off in terms of that? And how did you get any guidance in terms of that, or was it just you had to judge that for yourself?
I wish I could say that that's what I was doing. That I was deep undercover and I was playing Hanssen and manipulating him and finding ways to make sure I was pushing just the right amount, but not too much. Really, all I was doing for a long time was trying not to screw up. Because Hanssen was a trained, in fact, decorated special agent who was trained in counterintelligence, and he was also trained in counter-surveillance. And he's suddenly given his dream job months before he's about to retire, put in charge of this massive data set, and just told, hey, build cybersecurity for the FBI. Here's access to everything you've ever wanted. His only point of attack to see if he was clean or not was me. And that's what he did. I was supposed to gain his trust and learn all this information and do all those things, but really his main job was finding out if I was there to catch him. And so it was very difficult because he spent a lot of time, and I realized this at some point in the case, making me react to him, throwing me back on my heels, upsetting me, saying all sorts of crazy stuff. At one point, he came around behind me while I was sitting at my desk, and he looked over my shoulder and leaned on my back and had his hands on my shoulders and was sort of like, I was like, get the hell off of me, man. And I pushed him and he chuckled and he walked around and I'm like, how am I supposed to catch the guy if I'm always thinking about this? There's this picture that Kate Alleman was the special agent who was basically in charge of making sure, helping me not screw up. And she sent me a picture later of the office. I still have it. And if you look at it, you can see my desk, and I moved file cabinets and chairs all around the desk so he couldn't get behind me because I got so tired of it. At the end, what happened was there was a point where I realized that I was spending so much time tired and exhausted and reacting to Hanssen. I was never going to win unless I made him react to me. Mm-hmm. And that's what had to happen. And I remembered, we always talk in business, right? As an entrepreneur, in anything that you do that's innovative, you have what we call a light bulb moment. You've probably heard of this, right? That moment where you find that innovation, where you find that solution, where you find that win. In law, it's I found that one line in the case that defeats the whole other argument, right? And that light bulb moment was when I was a ghost, I took risks all the time, and I won big cases. You have to balance sort of risk versus reward in everything we do. And here I was taking zero risk. I was trying so hard not to lose, I wasn't winning. And my light bulb moment was I'm going to have to take some risk. And once I started doing that, once I really started pushing Hanssen, challenging Hanssen, calling his BS, calling him out for that, he started trying to prove that he was correct. Now, I finally was able to use that psychology degree from Auburn University. Like, I realized, dude's a narcissist. I can play on that. That I know how to do. I took a whole class on it. You just challenge and challenge and challenge, and they just want to prove how smart they are. And he did, and he would say all sorts of crazy stuff. And I had no idea what it meant, but I'm bringing it to the analysts, and they're like, and suddenly it's coming back. There's no way he could have known about this case. There's no way he could have known about that operation. Like, we realized that this is really the guy we're after. And suddenly I'm told, this isn't just some spy we think is, a foreign asset for Russia. This is the spy. I was like, what do you mean? This is Gray Suit. Like, no. Gray Suit. And this is the guy that everyone had been after in the entire intelligence community for over 2 decades. And I'm sitting there in a room with him. I should have put it together because his code name was Gray Day, and code names are all derivatives off of the master you're looking at. But I suddenly realized not only is this a spy, but I found information that made us very confident that this was the spy. And I transitioned everything about this investigation into, okay, no more benefit of the doubt. Now we're just going to catch him.
So just to be clear, so at this time, you are undercover trying to, catch Hanssen. After that, you'd have to write up the reports that same evening. You'd still have to go to law school, and you had a new wife at home.
Yes.
Okay, just keeping track
That
of
was my life.
sort of your...
So what I would do is I would, FBI headquarters is right around the corner. Actually, I was just in FBI headquarters, and I hadn't been in there for like a decade. And anybody here been to FBI headquarters? Yeah. There's a Starbucks in the courtyard. What the hell? We didn't have anything when I was there. And the courtyard's really nice, and I was like, wow, this is pleasant. I can't talk about how horrible FBI headquarters is anymore, because there's a running track and a whole gym, and they do like yoga classes. Back then there was this, like, you went all the way in the sub-basement, there was a place to go lift weights, and like some of the benches had duct tape on them from where they were ripped, so it's much different. But yes, I would finish with Hanssen. There was this rule where I couldn't leave till he left. So I'm just sitting there, come on, man, I'm gonna be late for class again. And the special agent that I was working with was kind enough to wait. And so as soon as Hanssen was out and we knew he was in pocket with a surveillance team, I would leave in a different corner than he went, just in case, get in the car with Kate. She would drive me to GW, like right out the door there, drop me off right outside the quad, right? And
With sirens?
No. This is unmarked cars, right? And she'd drive slow because the entire time we were going there, she would debrief me for the day. And at that point, I would hand her a floppy disk. And the floppy disk was, well, let me finish this. She'd drive me here. I'd go to class for a few hours, or sometimes 3 hours. Run across the street to where they had coffee. The one coffee place, there's the Paul's there now. Before it was like a Panera, I think. This was a night student thing. Those of you who aren't night students don't understand. You got like a couple minutes before class, and we would all just charge over there as fast as we could. That's why nobody sleeps at night. And finish class, and then sometimes she'd pick me up right after. I think sometimes she just sat out there waiting. And then we'd go back to FBI headquarters because there was a search, and for chain of evidence, I had to be there present for every search. Particularly if I found the information, or I was the source of the information that they were going to search and catalog forensically. And then I would finally go home. And I'm a night owl. My wife, by 8 o'clock, she's asleep. And so she will wait, because we were only married 3 months. So, things still mattered. Now it's like, if I'm not home, go sleep in the guest room, don't wake me up. But she waited, and we'd have like a few minutes together, then she would go to bed, and I'd get in bed with her and pretend I was going to sleep, and as soon as she was like deeply asleep, I count to like 100 breaths, I would get up, sneak out, go to the couch, pull up this laptop I had hidden, and then I would type up my surveillance notes for the whole day, save it on the floppy disk, which would said like law school outline on it, but I'd encrypt it just in case he went in my bag, because he'd go in my bag all the time. In case you stole the floppy disk. And then that's the floppy disk I would hand to Kate. And she would give me another one. And then I would, rinse and repeat every night. So it was a lot. It was a lot. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night at the most.
So now in the movie, the two sort of seminal sort of events is the search of his vehicle got a lot of attention, and then you with the Palm Pilot and that. So is that sort of an accurate sort of seminal events? And if so, can you walk us through those?
Yeah, I think the search of his car was more about, the way that I tell it, my learning the rule of, for all my military friends out there, Murphy's Law, right? Which I knew very well in undercover operations, special operations. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it always does, right? And it constantly does, and it never wants to end, right? Murphy was someone who rode shotgun with you. And I had a task, I had all these tasks, and one was get him out of his car get him away from his car for sufficient time so that we can haul it into one of these hidden FBI garages in the parking substructure and search it and install tech in it and do all sorts of other things to it. And so we were desperate to find any information that would lead us to understand where he was going to make this next drop. At this point, we knew it was coming. We heard chatter from overseas. The Russians were preparing to receive a really important job. And the surveillance team was catching Hanssen shining a flashlight at a sign at a park in Vienna, Virginia called Backstone Park, and getting really pissed off. Like, there's video of him. He'd get really upset when he'd shine a light. That he was looking for a signal, and there was no signal. So the Russian intelligence officer, the IO, would put a line of tape on the sign. By the way, this is all in my book. You're not hearing anything that's going to get me arrested. The FBI pre-publication review read my book before anybody else. But they would put a line of tape on there, and then he would look for the line of tape, and we knew when he saw the tape, he would know that it was time for him to load the dead drop in the park under a footbridge. So we knew something was coming, and we really were trying to find any source of information we could. So one idea was, let's look in his car. All you got to do is get him away from the car. So I set up a meeting with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we were going to meet their Chief of Information Assurance, which would have been Hanssen's counterpart. He was really excited. He was pissed off that I had set up a meet for the CIA, and then I think the night before, Louis Freeh, who's the director of the FBI, felt, we're going to take the biggest spy in U.S. history into the FBI, into the CIA's data center. Maybe this could get me in trouble. And so he called the director and said, yeah, this is going to happen. And the director was like, no, it isn't. And then they had to tell me, you're going to have to tell Hanssen that it's canceled. And we don't really have a reason why. Make something up. And Hanssen was throwing things in his office angry. But I did set up a meeting for the DIA. I guess the FBI wasn't very worried about that one. And go down to the parking garage where I'd reserved a Chevy Tahoe. Now, to be fair, Rich Garcia swears it was there and I couldn't find it. I swear it wasn't there and he didn't have it there. But for whatever reason, there was no Chevy Tahoe down there. And Hanssen's getting more and more agitated as I'm saying, let's try another level. It's not on B1. Let's go to B2. Let's go to B3. And I'm hauling him around the whole parking garage looking for this car that it's not there. It wasn't there. I had this argument with Rich just the other day. And I thought to myself, I failed. And then he says, of course, he says the one thing I was hoping he wouldn't say, we'll take my car. It's like anything but that. Let's take our FBI badges and go up on the street and requisition a vehicle. They do it in the movies. I don't know if you do it in real life, but let's just do that. Or call a cab. Not your car, but he's getting more agitated. And then I remembered another task that I was supposed to do that I really didn't want to do because Hanssen had this very, very short fuse and very, very big temper. It was make him angry. I was like, yeah, right. I'll do that. Down the road, we'll get to that one. But I'm thinking, I failed this operation for the day. There's this whole team ready to do it, and I screwed this up. So let's make him angry and see what happens. The arrest team who was prepping for if I actually found a way to catch him wanted to know how he'd react in stress, right? I already had a pretty good idea because I spent 8 hours a day locked in a prison with him. And so I said, hey, boss, as he turned to go to his car, and he turned around and he said, what? I said, we're not going to take your car. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm not showing up in the DIA in your ugly, battered, grotesque silver Ford Taurus that you probably bought in like 1982. Like, we're gonna walk around this garage until we find that Chevy Tahoe, and that is that. And I mean, the dude was way older, like 6'4", and like walked with a lurch, never moved fast, I think, in his life. And when I asked him, so what do you do to exercise? He's like, sometimes I skip lunch. But in like seconds, he was on me, grabs me by the lapels, lifts me up on my toes, and he's screaming mad in my face. And he's saying, why are you so insistent we find that Tahoe? Why are you so insistent we not take my car? And I'm thinking, all right, made him angry, got that. But now we're in trouble because he's moved from suspicion, which is safe if you're checking the corners, you're watching your back, you're looking for the threats, to paranoia, which is everybody's after me. Now I'm done. I got to take that open ticket to Moscow and the fake passport the Russians got me. I found that, by the way, in an earlier search. And I'm out of here. And I'm thinking, I got to do something. So I played to everything I learned about him. And I said, whoa, it's not about your car. I'm sorry about insulting your car. It is ugly. I'm sorry about insulting your car, but it's about you. We need to show up at the DIA in that black Chevy Tahoe, lights and sirens, me driving, bulletproof glass. Like, we're FBI, DIA guys can't show up in your personal car. We gotta show up in the bureau car, right? With me driving you, and that totally fed him, right? And he said, "Okay, Eric, but we'll take my car this time." But I understand, and we ended up blowing the operation for the day. I did get it later. I got him out. I found the Tahoe. We left. They searched his car. They found tape, they found chalk, they found trash bags, they found all sorts of things that one would use to wrap a drop to the Russians.
And then the Palm Pilot.
Yes, so I learned from that. So like I said, I learned from that in the main operation. As I said, we had chatter, he's shining the flashlight, we knew a drop was coming, and we were desperate to find out where and when. I'm like, how am I supposed to find out where and when? Like, I can't ask them. You're asking me to find a smoking gun. As you go on in your legal careers, some partner will say, yeah, we're going to need a smoking gun for this case. And you can curse them all you want behind their back. Now, if you find it, you'll be the golden person. But they almost never happen. Ever, ever, ever. You don't find smoking guns. That's for, like, the show Law and Order. In here, they're asking me to find something that no one ever finds. So why don't I just go outside and find a unicorn for you, right? But I said, I'll try. And I spent all my time observing Hanssen, and he had a routine. And it was that he kept a Palm Pilot in his left back pocket, and every time he sat down, he pulled this old device out and put it in his bag. Okay, how many people in the audience, you can raise your hands, had a Palm Pilot? Yeah, so it's like nobody knows what a Palm Pilot is, right? This is how I know how old everybody is. The more all these keynotes I do, nobody knows, and I have to explain it. It was the first thing called a PDA, a Personal Data Assistant. It was this cool device, like a long time ago, that was basically just a big digital calendar, a big fat digital calendar, and you got information in it by tapping with a plastic stick. Couldn't use your finger. You just tap with a stylus. And that's how you get information in. And it took forever. But he had one of these things. He loved it. And when he sat down, he put it in his bag. When he stood up like clockwork, he put it in his back pocket. And I decided we need to get that away from him. I wasn't going to try to pick his pocket. I don't really know how to do that. And if he sits down, it's game over. So we had to come up with some kind of way to hack Hanssen. We had to get him away from his office with sufficient time to take this thing out of his bag, get it copied, and get it back before he knew it was gone. So I used everything I learned about Hanssen. I had an assistant director that I knew he hated. He was read into the case. The section chief, Rich Garcia, who I swear did not have the Tahoe in the right place, that Hanssen really didn't like because he thought he should have his job. And why does he get a windowed office and I don't? So I thought, we're going to have these two people come in unannounced. And they do. And Rich, who's hilarious, slaps $20 on his desk and says, you and me the shooting range, and I bet you that 20, 5 targets out of 5, I will win. Now, I also knew that Hanssen really loved to shoot. And his pride would not let him turn it down. He did try to turn it down, so I'm much too busy. And the assistant director says, this wasn't a request. Right. And so
he grumbles to his feet, puts on his grabs his ear protection, eye protection, holsters his firearm, and for the first time doesn't grab that palm pilot out of the bag. And they leave to go down to start shooting. I was totally ready for this. I was like, I'm not having backup plans for my backup plans. I have an asset down there in the range who texts me, in pocket shooting. And I go into the bag, I find the palm pilot, a floppy disk, and a data card. I'm taking all this stuff, run down 3 flights of steps, hand it over to the tech team, and as they're downloading the information to decrypt later, he had encrypted it all, which is a great clue. I mean, we encrypt information we don't want people to find. I get another text, he's out of pocket coming to you. And I'm telling the guy, I'm gonna need that stuff. I gotta get there before him. And they say, don't worry, yeah, we'll get it done, we're almost finished. And I said, you don't understand. He's armed and he's angry. I'm not armed. I'm not gonna win. I gotta get there before him. Now, real life isn't like Jack Bauer or Jack Ryan or James Bond. I don't know why all the spies start with J. It's not like 2 seconds before the nuclear warhead goes off, I cut the right wire. Like, I had a cool 3 minutes. I got in there, I got into his office, I kneeled down in front of his bag, I'm feeling all good about myself, I won, and I realized I planned everything except what pocket did these things come out of, right? Just write it down somewhere. And I have no clue. And it's coming through the door. So I just dropped all 3, zipped up all the pockets, ran to my desk, put the best poker face I've ever had. And he comes to the door, glares at me, goes in his office, slams his door, and I hear it zip. And I'm thinking, if I'm not here when he comes out, at this point, remember that whole scale from suspicion to paranoia? He's moved so far into paranoia that if I'm not here, he's gonna run. Maybe he evades surveillance, he gets away, we don't have what we need on him. Right now, he'd probably be like roommates with Edward Snowden, hanging out in Moscow, and having dinner with Putin. And so I had to sit there and just find some way to bring him back into this, because I knew there's no way I got this all right. He comes out, he leans over my desk, and he says, "Were you in my office?" And I had been, but I had a reason for being in there, and I said, "I put a memo in your inbox, didn't you see it?" I had. And he looks at me, and he holds this look for way too long. If you want to know how I felt, next time you're in a crowded elevator, the last one in, don't turn and face the doors. Stare at everybody. Look them in the eye and watch the panic cross their faces, because you're not supposed to do that. Actually, you know what? Try it. It's awesome. I do it all the time. I'm a little weird that way, but I like to see how people react to things. I kept that panic off my face, and instead of doing what he expected, I looked at him with this quizzical look and this look of what's the matter with you? And I said, what? And he says, I never want you in my office, and he leaves for the day. And less than 2 weeks later, he's on a bridge in Foxstone Park. He pulls a package out wrapped in trash bags and packing tape, puts it under the bridge, retraces his steps to his old Ford Taurus, and before he can put his key in the car, 2 vans screech to a halt, panel doors open, FBI agents jump out, they put the guns at him, he raises his hands and drops his keys, and he says, the guns are not necessary, and then he says, what took you so long? And he's arrested for espionage. We not only knew where he would make that final drop, but exactly when, what date and what time, because the Palm Pilot is a calendar. And that, by the way, everyone, is how you catch a spy.
It didn't say dead drop, did it, on the calendar?
No, it didn't. It was a system of dates, and he used a mathematical equation to alter his date. So even if you got it, you wouldn't know the date. But I, in an earlier search, found an old letter he'd written to the Russians that gave the decryption for the date system he used. So we were able to very easily, after they decrypted the Palm Pilot, figure out the date systems and figure out where he was going to be, not only the location and the day, but the time of night, 7:13 at night. So when he thought he was completely safe in the middle of this park, which is impossible to follow someone into, there's no way, I was just there the other day, there was no way surveillance could have followed him into this park. They were already there. Yeah. And that's the best place to be, ahead of your target, because they're always looking behind them, and they can't find you if you're already hidden in front of them.
So one last question on Hanssen, and then a couple post-Hanssen questions before we open it up for questions from the audience. So Robert Hanssen recently passed away.
Yes.
How did you hear about that, and what was sort of your reaction?
I heard about it. I heard about it from an insider. I had just done this massive podcast for Major Garrett and CBS News. He had called me. I've done some interviews with him, like The Takeout and other things. And he called and saying, "Look, I'm going to start a new podcast. It's going to be a big deal. It's very well funded by CBS, and I'm looking for a story. And do you think there's anything left in the Hanssen case?" I said, "There's lots." And they decided to make that the flagship. And we spent hours in interviewing. They interviewed everyone. It's going to be great, by the way. But then CBS said, "Yeah, we're going to table this until Hanssen died." And the first person to call me to say Hanssen died was the producer. Said, "Have you heard that Hanssen just died?" I'm like, "What?" And before, I think maybe before his family, they figured it out. It's news, right? Media. And there's no secrets anymore. And then I was like, they said, it's a rumor right now. We got to confirm it. So then I started reaching out to my whole network, and within 10 minutes, yes, he just died in prison. There's no formal notice yet, but it's going to happen. And I was like, wow, I'm going to scoop this. So I was the first to tweet it. How do you like that? And, the only time I've ever put anything on social media that anyone cared to read. And I still have horrible mixed feelings about it because, the case was horrible, but I'm so far beyond it that I look back and realize that it was such an immense opportunity in my life. It was the only case like that the FBI had ever run, and one of the most unique cases in the FBI's entire history. It's taught almost in every intelligence school anywhere, and I was a central part of it. Now, it was much bigger than me. There were 500 agents working on it in 3 different squads at one point. I was just doing my part on the inside. Now, they were looking everywhere else outside. But it was part of something I did. It changed my life, and for years I had tried to get into Supermax to talk to him, to close this out, both for myself, but also to ask him some questions I wanted to ask him. One of which was, why exactly did you do it? Because I tell everybody why I think, but you've never answered this. And then 2, I just wanted to confirm with him and understand, in that final drop to the Russians he made that we intercepted, which was good for me, and it led to his guilty plea and an arrest. He was looking at the death penalty 4 different ways for what he had done over his career. He dropped my information, all my information, with a little note that I would be a perfect person for the Russians to recruit. Yeah. So if that had made it, the FBI never would have left me alone. They were like, "You're a double agent for life now, buddy." Yeah. I wanted to ask him about that. I wanted to understand, that the connection that we made, how well I had gained his trust, that he felt that I was going to take over for him. And I wanted to know, what were you going to do with that? So did you think you were going to retire and get your pension and then go work for a company and then use me as a vehicle to send secrets? Were you going to give me your whole scheme, the whole way that you were able to transmit secrets, and I was just going to continue to be your inside man in the FBI? Or did you just think that you wanted to leave a legacy and I was going to be that legacy, right? Well, now we'll never know.
So let me ask you sort of one last question before Kendall sort of opens it up here to the audience. So what was the decision that made you want to, and I know you've talked about this before, leave the FBI at that point and either branch out into other legal areas or eventually sort of non-legal areas?
Well, after the Hanssen case, really at the point that I was put on the Hanssen case, I was already deep into the throes of burnout. I had been undercover for 5 straight years. I was completely exhausted, and getting married really changed a lot about what I wanted to do with my time. So I had already been thinking about what do I do next, and that was one of the main reasons I was at law school. I wanted the higher degree, there was a lot of talk after the Hanssen case, go back into special agents class. And I realized that, hey, but this is what it turns out I'm really good at. So now I'm going to go do the real, the very dangerous, undercover work with what? Gangs, mafia, those kind of things. And I considered, I actually talked to the FBI and I said, I got a lot of law school debt that I've been racking up. Not as much as the day students, because I was working full time, but how about I agree to come back as a justice or FBI attorney, and you help me with some of that? They're like, we don't have a program for that. Like, I just got the biggest buy in U.S. history. You can't figure that out? And they're like, no, because that's not how government works. The bureaucracy does not care about the cogs in the wheel. And I was like, all right, fine. I've got an opportunity to be a summer associate, and I got to repair my marriage, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up at a much smaller firm called Piper Rudnick, that within 5 years grew into like the mega firm of mega firms.
That's fascinating. Let's turn it over to question and answer here, and we haven't even had a chance to sort of talk about your post sort of FBI experience, which is also fairly robust and interesting. So I would encourage questions from all that. So please.
All right, I'm going to pass around a microphone, so please raise your hand and I will bring it to you.
Hi, Luke, I'm in 2L here. I may or may not identify with drinking in Turley's class as well, so we'll start with that. Does your experience in surveillance, does it make watching like spy stuff in fiction pretty bad because it's just like, that's terrible, that's not how it works? So like the fiction side of it, but then also like the evasion side, like reading Moscow Rules or something like that. How does that all play out in your enjoyment of those things?
Yeah, and I'm going to stand up so I can see you all when you're asking your question, and because I just can't stand sitting anymore. When you're an insider in anything, and then you go watch, Hollywood or TV portraying that thing, there's always some skepticism. But I love spy movies, and sometimes the dumber and weirder and sillier they are, the better for me, because I like knowing that that's just not how it works. I even consult with Hollywood and TV all the time, and they're like, yeah, but if we made it real, it would be boring. So let's make it as goofy as possible. If I could have done what I wanted to do, that's what your character will do, right? So, like, I love the old James Bond movies. The new ones, God, it's hard to stay away through them. They really need to change a little bit. But, like, I love 24, and that's just straight up ridiculous. I did counterterrorism, and I met Keith Sutherland the other day in a bar, and he bought me a beer, and I was like, I love doing 24. I'm going to be a fan right now. And he was like, can I have a copy of your book? And, because he's into the whole FBI thing anyway. To directly answer your question, yeah, there's a lot of that, but I still have fun with it. I mean, we go to the movies to have fun. Reading books, though, some books are better than others. Tom Clancy, God rest his soul, that dude had access. Because I remember reading Bear and the Dragon, which is all about Russian foreign counterintelligence, and man, I was like, who is he talking to? There's ways and means in here. How did this get published? So there are things that I'll read and I'll be just shocked and surprised, pleasantly so.
Mr. O'Neill, thank you very much for your remarks here today. One of the biggest challenges to national security right now that people are talking about is artificial intelligence. How do you think that's changing the intelligence space where you worked?
Everybody wants to hear about AI, and we're talking about it at length, ad nauseum, particularly in the world of cybersecurity. Look, AI is enhancing, what it does is it enhances what we do. So if you think of it that way, or AI or machine learning, there is a distinction. Everything's really AI at the end of the day, but a lot of what's happening is that AI is enhancing not only espionage, but cybercrime, and particularly cybercrime. So cyber criminals don't have a lot of the same funding that, say, a foreign intelligence unit do. Although now they're making so much money off of dark web sourced attacks that they're getting better. And there are cybercrime groups, syndicates, I call them, that are hiring intelligence officers away from intelligence units because they can make more money working for the cybercrime group. What AI does is allows them to do a few things. One is scale operations. If you're going to write novel code, you don't need as many coders because the AI can do a lot of work for you, and then you have your coders who come in and finish it off. The other thing it allows is to, particularly for attackers where English isn't their first language, and now we're suddenly seeing these brilliantly written spear phishing attacks, for example, that don't have all the hallmarks that make it easy for our AI, our machine learning, to source and identify. So no comma is out of place. The language is all perfect. You can even take, like, for example, business email compromise is still the #1 cyber attack as far as cost. If you want to create the perfect business email compromise, and this is sometimes called the CFO hack, for example. In the old days, you get an email from the CFO saying, pay this invoice, right? It comes from the CEO. It can direct employees to do any number of things. AI is, you can feed a lot of writing that you've sourced from social media and other places, or there's just business writing of an individual, and have the AI write as though they're that individual. Sounds exactly like them. And it makes it a lot harder for an employee who's got like one training a year to identify that this isn't the real person. Now, where's AI going to go in the future? Deepfakes are already a problem. Not very long ago, about the time that Top Gun Maverick came out, deepfaking someone's voice took a lot of time and energy and processing. Now you can deepfake someone's voice in about 3 seconds and create an entire profile of someone's voice from just a few sentences of spoken word. So, I say Top Gun Maverick because I'm not going to ruin the movie for you if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it, what's the matter with you? But there is a scene where Val Kilmer's character, Iceman, Val Kilmer can't talk. He's completely lost his capacity to speak, stands up and says some things. And that's a company that deepfaked his voice by using thousands and thousands of hours of him recording his voice for a documentary he was doing before he lost it. Now you just need a few sentences and you can do it. So that's how far AI has come in just the months since that movie came out. The future is going to be defects of people, where, for example, I tell organizations, just wait until instead of sending an email, the CEO shows up in a Teams meeting and tells your employees, I need you to immediately process this purchase order for $1 million or we're going to lose the vendor. Like, who's going to think to, where's the check and balance for that? He's looking right at me and telling me. That's where we are in another week or so, or something. Thank you.
Hello, sir. I want to start by thanking you for your service. I have a question about billionaires. So currently there's a little bit of speculation because Elon Musk has comprehensive information on Russian and Ukrainian troop formations in the Russo-Ukrainian war. And I guess, is the FBI at all speculative of the amount of information that major corporations in the US accumulate on a daily basis and how that could be a threat to national security?
Yeah, well, money buys access, and if you have the ability to conduct your own intelligence work because you have billions, then you can learn things, particularly if you're embedded with companies that are working all over the world. I'll flip this a different way. The FBI does concern itself with information that could be used by foreign power, but the FBI also uses billionaires and people with access to set up meets. I get called all the time by people in business who say, the FBI called me and I don't know what to do in my investigative services consultancy. So, well, what do they want you to do? Well, they just want me to get one of my clients to come to a hotel, somewhere in the world and meet with me. And I'm like, and them? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, well, where are you working? Oh, in Russia. All right. So here's what they're trying to do. They really want to talk to this person. They want to see if they can recruit that person. There's no way that they can get in front of that person without their intelligence agency knowing. So they're asking you to set up a meet because, you know, Russian intelligence isn't going to think there's anything weird with that. You're a client, and then they're going to ask you to leave the room, and they're going to sit down with them and see if they can turn them. That happens all the time. So it kind of goes both ways. You know, money does give you access, and sometimes intelligence units can use it to further our goals as well. So thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. So my question is, aside from the whole AI thing, how do you think the balance of power has shifted between spies and malicious insiders and the people trying to catch them with the advent of modern technology like better and better encryption and faster computers and advanced IDS and IPS systems?
Well, let's put it this way. The cost of, let's just talk about, I'm going to answer about cybercrime first, and then I'm going to talk about cyber espionage, because they really go hand in hand. The reason is that I say in my book, Ray Day, there are no hackers, there are only spies. There's no distinction anymore. The lines have blurred so much. We used to think of cyber spies, cyber espionage units being the cream of the crop, the best and the best. I mean, they're creating novel zero-day attacks and launching them. Now cyber criminals are doing it. They've modeled the spies, they've learned from the spies. The dark web has grown to such an enormous, unstoppable place, virtual place, that law enforcement can't even wrap their minds around it. So here's a few stats for you. Right now, the size of the dark web exceeds $7 trillion. By 2025, it'll exceed 12. So if you call that a gross domestic product, right now, in terms of GDP, it goes the US, China, the dark web, in economy of scale, right? And then it goes Germany and Japan. So in not too long, not too many years, the dark web, in terms of the amount of money stolen and moving through it, is going to be bigger than Germany and Japan put together and rivaling China. And we have no way to stop it. So think about that. So really what cybersecurity is doing, and even counterintelligence to cyber espionage, is less about we're going to shut down the threat. Because, I mean, go Google Silk Road. We took that down. It came right back. It's there again, by the way. Go Google Body Parts Bazaar. You can't stop that. If you want to buy an eyeball, right? It's about $2,000. You know, a heart transplant, all in, is about $150,000. I mean, these things exist, and as soon as they're shut down, they come right back. And we can go into all the other horrible things, but you can also buy an entire toolkit to launch a novel ransomware attack with instructions on how to do it, and even templates for the spear phishing emails. So what we're trying to do in cybersecurity, and leveraging our own AI and assets that come from intelligence, is building counterintelligence for cybersecurity. We're trying to stop the attacks by understanding what an attack looks like. Even as they're getting better at creating novel attacks, we need to use our machine learning and AI to spot those attacks. And a lot of that, right now, we used to talk about endpoint detection, which is still critical, and stopping the attack at the endpoint. Now we're talking about identity protection. Instead of trying to protect a machine, we're trying to protect your identity, understand your identity, and start parsing what looks good from the bad. So, what was your name? Reed. Okay, so Reed comes in every day and he works a 9 to 5, and he's working for a company. He works from this location. Now suddenly Reed is working from somewhere across the country, and he's dialing into a VPN at his company that he's never dialed into before, and he's doing it at 2 in the morning. Right? You need to understand what's normal in a person's identity profile, and then compare that to the sudden abnormal, and then shut your account out. So you wake up the next morning, and you're like, I can't get into anything. And you reach out, and security says, well, you were doing something really weird. Where are you? Home? Because your account was compromised. And now you're a virtual trusted insider, and you don't even know it. That's what we're up against right now, and I think that's where the solution is looking at. And then all the other things you have to do to make that work. That's where technology is going. So really, I talk to people who are in IT all the time, and they're down because they're overworked and they feel like they're underpaid. And I tell them, look, You're a spy hunter. That's what you are. Like, put it on your resume, because that's literally what you're doing in cybersecurity. You're hunting spies.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time this afternoon. You spoke about Robert Hanssen's hubris and some of the qualities that he had that made him more vulnerable to being found or losing his temper. Can you share some of the other lessons learned from working with someone who appeared on the surface to be a dedicated employee but turned into one of the most infamous insider threats, and how that's informed your career as a cybersecurity strategist?
Sure, absolutely. You know, learning from Hanssen was a lot of learning about how to catch a spy, but also those personal interactions. Honestly, I think the biggest thing that we learned from Hanssen at the FBI was to deconstruct everything he'd done. I like to talk of a cyber penetration investigation as you have to learn the how, the what, and the where. How did they get in, right? What did they steal, and where did they go? Because attackers move laterally, so that's essentially what he did in the FBI. Learning the how and the what and the where was really important. So catching him was more about getting him to talk than punish him. And understanding his personality gave us a lot of insight into what he was doing and why he was doing it. It kind of gets into why I think he did it. I'd sort of answer your question in a different way. Because no one's asked this yet. Everybody always asks that first. He was a big James Bond fan. And he wanted to be in field ops, but he was a brilliant analyst. The FBI made him an analyst, and that made him angry. So he was a disgruntled employee who wasn't doing what he wanted to do, who thought he should be doing something that he perceived as at a higher level. But actually he was exactly where he could best serve the FBI, doing one of the most important jobs, Russian foreign intelligence. And he also needed money. He was flat broke and spending more than he made, and having all these children, and he couldn't afford their schools, was mad at the FBI. He's made fun of a little bit because he was kind of an oddball. He wore the same suit all the time. It was this dark navy suit, so he got the nickname Dr. Death and the Undertaker, the Mortician. And so he was mad at the FBI, and he wanted to show them up. And at the same time, the FBI wasn't listening to him. He kept saying, attackers are going to penetrate computer systems at the FBI and steal information. And we're not doing anything to stop them. He was right, and he showed them, right? And so he became a trusted insider. He became what we call a mole. And he was just vengeful. There are letters where he says, never send me more than $50,000 at a time. I'm going to get caught, I can't spend it. But he was providing for that 50 grand information worth billions of dollars, and very ruthless, and even dropping names of people that he knew that the Russians would haul back to Moscow and execute, because he knew that those were people who could maybe, were our spies and could maybe say, we think the mole is in the FBI. Like, he quickly erased them. So he's very ruthless and egregious in what he did. And he did it for a number of reasons, but at some point, he started to make enough money where he didn't have to do it anymore. But his pride, that hubris, right, that narcissistic side of his personality wouldn't let him quit, because this was the thing he did better than everyone else, certainly in FBI's history, but I would say he was one of the most damaging spies in history for the damage he caused to the FBI and counterintelligence in the United States. That's hard to give up when you're the best at something, better than anyone else. And so he didn't. He just turned it up to 11 and kept going.
This is a fascinating conversation, but we are coming close to time, so I'll take one more. If somebody wants to volunteer for the last question, a lot of pressure. Okay.
Hi, my name is Irene. I'm from Uganda, and your story is really fascinating. So I wanted to know your analysis of Hanssen. You said at the beginning that he was really brilliant and he was really good at what he did. It ends up that you are also very good at what you did. Do you think that he came to a place where he was tired of running and he let you catch him? Because you also said that when they caught him, he asked what what took them so long? And then also there was some information you said that he had actually recommended you for the Russians to hire you. Do you think that he actually knew that you were onto him, but he just was tired of running?
That's a great question, and it was a big debate for a long time. I had a long debate with Billy Ray, who's the director of Breach, and also rewrote the screenplay with me. Billy had this idea that Hanssen was a patriot, that he was trying to show the FBI where they'd gone wrong, and prove to them that a trusted insider at his level could exist. I thought that was silly. He was a pretty ruthless spy who undermined the FBI and the entire intelligence community every possible way he could, and made a good chunk of change off of it. And he got his kicks off of doing it. Now, to answer your specific question, I don't think he wanted to get caught. But you're onto something. He desperately, I truly believe that he desperately wanted to tell everyone his genius. It was eating him up inside that he couldn't tell everyone how smart he was, how brilliant he was, how he'd gotten away with this for 22 years and was going to sail off into the sunset with his whole pension and take a job at a cybersecurity company and never get caught. He skirted it a lot with me. And at some point, the agents sat me down and said, he's recruiting you, we want you to make it happen. Because he would say things like, we would have this constant argument about children. And he was very upset that I'd been married 3 months and somehow hadn't got my wife pregnant. Like, not really the conversation you expect to have with your boss, right? And I said, look, first of all, too much information there, buddy. And second of all, I live in a horrible little apartment that has 1 bedroom and no heat. And we just got married and, maybe way down the road. And even if we had a child, I can't afford one. And he would say things like, oh, there's a way. God will help you find a way. And there is a way. We'll get there. We'll talk about it more. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what's the way? Where do those secrets go, buddy? Because, now I can catch you tomorrow if you'll finish this conversation. I actually, and just to finish this question, I disagreed with the arrest plan. The arrest plan to arrest him and put his face in the asphalt right after he made that drop in Foxstone Park. I thought, wait, let him make it. Let him make it feel elated that he got away with it, that he was clean. And then on Tuesday, because Monday was President's Day weekend, President's Day, I was going to drive him to Quantico. And I had this idea that I'm going to park in the middle of the parking lot where, he's isolated, bring him away from everyone. And an agent that he really respects, I'd get out of the car, he'd get into the car, shake Hanssen's hand and say, we know it was you, we caught you, tell me how you did it. And I truly believe that he would have just done it. Now maybe that's, the writer in me, thinking how perfect for the end of a story, but I knew that embarrassing him in his neighborhood where neighbors could see, Foxstone Park is, you could walk from his house, and that's how close he was doing his dead drops, which is a lot of narcissism in itself, right? I thought he would be so embarrassed and so caught out that he was just going to lawyer up, and that's exactly what he did. So with that, thank you all very much.
Mr. O'Neill, Professor Richard, we are just so deeply grateful that you were able to take the time today to give this discussion. We do have 2 small tokens of appreciation for both of you. So on behalf of our program and the student group, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming.